The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive bowl carved from living crystal. 847 different species filled the seats that rose in perfect circles toward the domed ceiling. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, turning growls, clicks, musical tones, and chemical signals into words that every being could understand. Commander Kim Tae-ho sat in the human section, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from last week's battle. His dark eyes scanned the chamber with the careful attention of a soldier who had seen too much war. Next to him, Admiral Park So-jin adjusted her medals, each one representing a world saved or a species protected. Dr. Lee Byung-soo, the team's expert on alien cultures, reviewed his notes one final time, though he suspected they would not matter today. The humans were tired, not just physically tired, though 3 straight months of fighting the void crawlers in the Outer Rim had drained even their strongest warriors. They were tired in their souls. For 300 years, every crisis in the galaxy had the same solution: call the humans. When the Zalari were being wiped out by plague, humans found the cure. When the peaceful Mondari faced invasion, human fleets arrived to defend them. When pirates threatened the trade routes, human patrols kept them clear. The crystalline speaker, Velthar, rose from the center of the chamber. The ancient being had overseen the council for over 1,000 years, and its voice carried the weight of that experience. Light refracted through its transparent body as it spoke. "We gather today to address a matter of great importance to our galactic community," Velthar announced. The chamber fell silent. Even the usual whispers and side conversations stopped. For centuries, one species has dominated our military affairs. One species has imposed its will through violence and force. Today, we must decide if this can continue. Kim Tae-ho felt his jaw tighten. He knew where this was going, but the directness still surprised him. Around the chamber, representatives of hundreds of worlds nodded in agreement. Species that humans had saved from extinction, protected from invasion, or helped through disasters were all nodding along. "The humans," Velthar continued, "have shown time and again that their first response to any problem is violence. They expand aggressively, they fight without mercy, and they impose their solutions on others. This behavior threatens the peaceful nature of our galactic community." Admiral Park So-jin leaned forward slightly. Her fingers drummed once on her knee, the only sign of her growing anger. She had lost count of how many human soldiers had died protecting these very species. The memorial walls on every human world were covered with names of those who gave their lives for alien civilizations they had never seen. "Therefore," the speaker announced, "the Council proposes that humanity undergo pacification protocols. These neural modifications will suppress their aggressive instincts and territorial drives. They will still be valuable members of our community, but they will no longer pose a threat to galactic peace." The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives turned to each other, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sound and motion. But Kim Tae-ho noticed something that chilled him more than the proposal itself. Not one voice was raised in protest. Not one. Species spoke in defense of humanity. Dr. Lee Byung-soo had spent 40 years studying these cultures. He understood their languages, their customs, their ways of thinking. As he watched their reactions, he saw something that broke his heart. They were not discussing whether the proposal was right or wrong. They were discussing the technical details of how to implement it. The Altarian representative, whose homeworld humans had saved from asteroid impact just 5 years ago, was explaining how neural modification technology worked. The Coraxian delegate, whose species humans had protected from slavery for 2 centuries, was discussing the legal framework for forced medical procedures. The Threnodi, whose entire civilization existed because human intervention had stopped their civil war, were debating the timeline for implementation. Velthar called for quiet, and the chamber settled down. We will now vote on Resolution 2847, the mandatory pacification of humanity. All in favor? Lights began appearing across the chamber. One by one, every non-human delegation activated their voting crystals. The display showed the count rising: 100, 200, 500, 800. When it stopped, the number glowed in the center of the chamber. 846 votes in favor. Any opposed? Velthar asked, though the question seemed almost mocking. A single light appeared in the human section. Kim Tae-ho had activated their crystal, casting the only vote against their own destruction. The display showed 1 vote opposed. The resolution passes, Velthar announced. Humanity has 30 galactic standard days to report to designated medical facilities for pacification procedures. Failure to comply will result in the revocation of all galactic citizenship rights and trade privileges. Kim Tae-ho stood slowly. His movement drew every eye in the chamber. The commander was not tall by human standards, but something about his presence made him seem to fill the space around him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the silence. "Let me understand this correctly," he said. "You want to perform brain surgery on my entire species because we are too good at keeping you alive?" The chamber remained silent. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For 3 centuries, every time someone threatened you, you called us. Every time you faced a disaster you could not handle, you asked for our help. Every time you needed someone to die for your freedom, you sent our children to do it. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "And now you want to reward our service by crippling our minds?" Admiral Park So-jin stood beside him, her face stone cold. Dr. Lee Byung-soo gathered his papers slowly, his movements deliberate and final. "You know what the real problem is?" Kim Tae-ho continued. "It is not that we are too violent. It is that you are afraid we might stop being your personal army. You are afraid that someday we might say no to one of your requests. So you want to make sure we never can." He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives whose species owed their existence to human sacrifice. "But here is something you forgot. We can say no right now." The 3 humans walked toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed in the enormous chamber, the only sound in the perfect silence. At the doorway, Kim Tae-ho turned back one final time. "You want peace?" he said. "You just got it. You will never have to worry about human violence again. You will also never have to rely on human protection again. Good luck with that." The chamber. Doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. In the silence that followed, 846 civilizations began to realize what they had just done. But it was too late. The humans were walking away. The blue marble of Earth hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by the busiest space traffic in human history. Ships of every size moved in careful patterns around the planet, their hulls gleaming with fresh repairs and new armor plating. Thus, orbital shipyards worked around the clock, but these were not ships being built. These were ships coming home. President Choi Min-ho stood at the viewing window of the presidential palace watching another fleet enter Earth's orbit. The Titan Defense Group had just returned from the Centauri sector, their massive battleships, still bearing the scars of their last engagement with Void Crawler scouts. In 2 weeks, they would be the last human military unit outside the Sol system. Behind him, the emergency session of the Human Colonial Congress buzzed with angry voices. Representatives from 200 human worlds filled the Great Hall, their faces showing the same mix of rage and determination that had spread across human space like wildfire. The news of the Galactic Council's ultimatum had reached every human settlement within days, carried by the fastest ships in the fleet. General Yoon Hai-wan stepped up to the podium, her uniform crisp despite having traveled non-stop from the outer rim. She had commanded the defense of human colonies for 20 years, and her reputation for careful planning was legendary. Today, that planning would be put to the ultimate test. Operation Exodus is ready to begin, she announced to the assembled delegates. Her voice was steady, professional, giving no hint of the magnitude of what she was describing. Every human ship, station, and outpost beyond the Sol sphere will be recalled within 60 standard days. All defense pacts with alien governments are hereby terminated. All trade agreements are voided. All humanitarian missions are canceled. The sea hall erupted in discussion. The representative from New Sol, humanity's largest agricultural colony, stood up. General, we have contracts to supply food to 12 different species. Some of them depend on our grain shipments to survive. The contracts will be fulfilled to the letter, General Yoon replied. We will deliver the food we have already promised. We will provide detailed instructions for growing their own crops, but after that, they are on their own. Another delegate, this one from the mining world of New Busan, raised his hand. What about the Alterian defense grid? We built those orbital platforms with our own hands. They protect 4 billion innocent civilians. The technical specifications will be transferred to Alterian authorities, the general said, along with maintenance schedules, upgrade procedures, and repair protocols. If they cannot operate the systems themselves, they can hire private contractors. Captain Nam Ji-woo sat in the gallery listening to every word. Her deep space monitoring station, Arcturus Gate, had protected the peaceful Alterian systems for 50 years. Her crew of 3,000 specialists had become part of the local community. Many had married Alterians, learned their languages, adopted their customs. Now she would have to tell them they were leaving forever. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering. Built into a massive asteroid, it housed the most advanced sensor arrays in the galaxy. From Arcturus Gate, her people could track ship movements across 17 star systems. They had prevented hundreds of raids, stopped dozens of invasions, and saved countless lives simply by being there. Pirates and raiders avoided the sector entirely, knowing that human response ships would arrive within hours of any distress call. Captain Nam, General Yoon called out, what is the status of the Prometheus defense grid? Nam Ji-woo stood up. All stations are operational, General. The network covers 43 core worlds and protects an estimated 200 billion civilian lives. Our sensors can detect void crawler incursions up to 30 light years away. Deactivation timeline? 30 days, General. We will need 2 weeks to transfer all technical data to local authorities, 1 week to train their personnel, and 1 week to safely shut down the quantum entanglement network. The hall fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. The Prometheus defense grid was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. It had prevented 3 major void crawler invasions and countless smaller attacks. Without it, the core worlds would be blind to threats until it was too late. Engineer Song Dae-jung had spent his entire career maintaining the grid. He had designed many of the improvements that made it so effective. As he listened to the discussion, he thought about the alien technicians he had trained over the years. They were good people, skilled in their own way, but they did not understand the systems the way humans did. They followed procedures without truly comprehending the underlying principles. Sir, he called out, the alien teams we have trained can operate the existing systems, but they cannot modify or upgrade them. The technology will slowly become obsolete. General Yoon nodded. That is not our problem anymore, Engineer Song. We will leave them with everything they need to maintain current capabilities. What they do with that knowledge is up to them. President Choi Min-ho stepped up to the podium. The hall fell completely, silent. He was an older man, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions made over many years in office. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of human history. My fellow humans, he began, today we face a choice that will define our species for generations to come. The galaxy has made it clear that they see us not as partners, but as servants. They want to change our minds, our hearts, our very souls to make us more convenient for them to use." He paused, looking out over the faces of humanity's elected representatives. "They call us violent because we fight their wars. They call us aggressive because we expand into space they are too afraid to claim. They call us dangerous because we refuse to bow down to their demands. But we know the truth. We are not violent by nature. We are protective. We do not fight because we love war. We fight because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. For 3 centuries, we have been the galaxy's shield. Today, we put down that shield and walk away." The vote was unanimous. Every human world, every colony, every settlement voted the same way. Operation Exodus would begin immediately. Within hours, the fastest ships in human space were carrying withdrawal orders to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. Human commanders who had spent their lives protecting alien worlds received the same message. Pack up, shut down, come home. The galaxy had asked for peace. They were about to get more peace than they had ever imagined. The first attack came exactly 6 months after the last human ship left Altarian space. War Master Krexval stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the peaceful blue-green world grow larger on the viewing screen. The Cytherian Empire had waited for this moment for over a century, held back only by the threat of human intervention. Now, nothing stood in their way. "Deploy the invasion fleet," Krexval ordered. His voice was a deep rumble that made the metal walls of his ship vibrate. The Cytherians were a warrior race, built for conquest, with thick armor-like skin and claws, designed for battle. They had spent generations watching weaker species prosper under human protection while they were forced to remain within their borders. The Altarian defense grid came online as soon as the Cytherian ships entered the system. Warning signals flashed across the planet's surface, and the orbital defense platforms began charging their weapons. For a moment, Krexval hesitated. He had faced these defenses before, when human ships backed them up. Human commanders had made the platforms deadly with their tactical expertise and lightning-fast response times. But there were no human ships coming. The platforms fired their weapons with mechanical precision, following the programmed patterns the humans had left behind. They hit some Cytherian ships, destroyed others, but they lacked the creative adaptation that human commanders brought to battle. Krexval smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Target the command stations first," he commanded. "Without human coordination, these platforms are just expensive targets." The battle lasted 18 hours. The Altarians fought bravely, but they had been peaceful for so long that their warriors were few and inexperienced. Their leaders sent desperate messages into space, calling for help that would never come. When the last defense platform exploded, in silent fire, the invasion of Altaria began. Far across the galaxy, Ambassador Velthar received the reports in the crystal chambers of Nexus Prime. The ancient being had ruled the Galactic Council for 1,000 years, but had never faced a crisis like this. The humans had been gone for only 6 months, and already the careful balance of power was collapsing. "How many distress calls have we received today?" Velthar asked its assistant, a nervous creature from a species the humans had once saved from extinction. 47, Your Excellency," the assistant replied, its voice shaking. "The void crawlers have emerged from dark space in 3 different sectors. The Corelli pirates have seized control of the Gamma trade route, and now the Cytherian Empire has begun what they call their Great Expansion." Velthar moved to the great window that looked out over the council complex. Ships filled the space around Nexus Prime, but they were not warships. They were refugee vessels, crowded with beings fleeing from conflicts across the galaxy. In the old days, human fleets would have already responded to the threats. Human diplomats would have negotiated ceasefires. Human relief ships would have delivered aid to the refugees. "Send a message to the human embassy," Velthar ordered. "Sir," The human embassy closed 3 months ago. All diplomatic staff returned to Earth. For the first time in centuries, the ancient crystalline being felt something like fear. Dr. Zin Ara worked late into the night in her laboratory on the Caraxian homeworld. She was one of the galaxy's leading experts on xenopsychology, the study of how different species thought and behaved. She had written many papers about human aggression, arguing that their violent tendencies made them unsuitable for civilized society. She had been one of the strongest supporters of the pacification proposal. Now she studied the data streaming in from across the galaxy, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Her computer screens showed star maps covered in red indicators. Each red dot represented a system under attack, a world in crisis, or a species facing extinction. The pattern was clear and terrifying. "Computer, display the correlation between human withdrawal and conflict emergence," she said. The map changed, showing a timeline of events. As human forces left each sector, conflicts began within weeks. Pirates moved into undefended space. Old enemies resumed ancient wars. Predator species began hunting again. Dr. Zin Ara realized with growing horror that humans had not been the cause of galactic violence. They had been the solution to it. Their mere presence had kept the peace. Their reputation for swift, overwhelming response had deterred aggression across thousands of light years. They were not the galaxy's problem. They were its immune system. On the distant human monitoring station at the edge of Sol space, Admiral Park So-jin watched the same data. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but her eyes were still sharp. The command center around her hummed with activity as human officers tracked the spreading chaos with professional interest. "Admiral, we are receiving another distress call from the Mondari system," reported Lieutenant Kang Ye-jin. "They are requesting immediate military assistance. Void crawler scouts have been detected at the edge of their system." Park So-jin looked at the tactical display. The Mondari were a gentle species of artists and philosophers. They had no military to speak of, having relied on human protection for over 2 centuries. Their world was beautiful, filled with crystal gardens and floating cities that were considered one of the wonders of the galaxy. "Send them our standard response," the Admiral said quietly. Lieutenant Kang nodded and activated the communications. Array. The message was brief and had been sent hundreds of times in the past months. "The human colonial government acknowledges your request for assistance. We are no longer able to provide military support outside the Sol system. We wish you well." "Admiral," another officer called out, "we are detecting massive fleet movements in the Outer Rim. It looks like a full-scale void crawler invasion, headed for the core worlds." Park So-jin studied the readings. In the old days, she would have already launched a response fleet. Human ships would have been moving to intercept the threat within minutes. The void crawlers would have been stopped before they could reach inhabited space. Now she simply made a note in the log and continued monitoring. "Ma'am, shouldn't we warn someone?" Lieutenant Kang asked. "The core worlds have no idea what is coming." The Admiral looked at her young officer with tired eyes. "Lieutenant, the galaxy made their choice. They decided they did not want human interference. They are getting exactly what they asked for." Across the galaxy, 846 civilizations were learning the difference between peace and the absence of humans. The lesson was written in burning worlds and desperate refugees. The galaxy had begged for peace, and humanity had walked away. Now they were discovering what peace really meant without someone strong enough to enforce it. Ambassador Kilnos had once been the proudest member of the Galactic Council. His species, the Vorthak, had ruled 17 star systems and commanded fleets that patrolled 100 worlds. He had been one of the loudest voices calling for human pacification, arguing that their military dominance threatened the natural order of galactic civilization. Now he stood in the refugee camp on Luna Station, his once magnificent robes torn and dirty, his proud crest feathers molted from stress. Behind him, what remained of his delegation huddled together in the cold metal corridors. They were the survivors of civilizations that no longer existed, representatives of worlds that had been consumed by the chaos that followed humanity's withdrawal. Director Han Yu-jin approached them with the measured steps of a career diplomat. She was younger than most of the human leadership, having risen through the ranks during the withdrawal years. Her face showed neither triumph nor sympathy, just professional courtesy. Behind her walked two security officers, their presence a reminder that humanity no longer took chances with alien visitors. "Ambassador Kilnos," she said formally. "The human colonial government acknowledges your request for an emergency meeting. Please follow me." The conference room was simple and clean, with a long table and chairs designed for various alien body types. Han Yu-jin took her seat at the head of the table, while the alien delegation arranged themselves across from her. The contrast was striking. The human diplomat looked calm and well-fed, her uniform crisp and her manner confident. The aliens looked like what they were, the desperate survivors of a galactic catastrophe. Kilnos placed a data crystal on the table. His hands shook as he activated it, projecting a holographic map of the galaxy. Red zones covered more than half the display, marking areas under hostile control or completely uninhabitable. Where once 847 civilizations had thrived, only scattered pockets of survivors remained. "Director Han," Kilnos began, his voice barely above a whisper, "we come to you with the unconditional surrender of what remains of the Galactic Council. We formally withdraw the pacification demand. We acknowledge that our actions were wrong, driven by fear rather than wisdom." Han Yu-jin nodded politely. "Your acknowledgement is noted, Ambassador." "We offer more than acknowledgement," another delegate interrupted. This was Zara Lin of the Ethereal Collective, a species that communicated through musical tones. Her song speech was translated by the universal device, but the desperation in her harmonies needed no translation. "We offer submission, complete submission to human military command. Your species can rule the galaxy as you see fit." A third delegate, barely recognizable as the crystal being that had once been Velthar's aide, spoke in fractured tones. "We bring gifts, technology, star charts, the location of ancient vaults filled with knowledge. Take it all. Take everything. Just please come back." Han Yu-jin listened to each offer with perfect patience. She made notes on her datapad, asked clarifying questions about territorial boundaries and resource access, and ensured that every word was properly recorded. When the presentations were finished, she leaned back in her chair. "These are generous offers," she said. "I will ensure that President Choi Yun-bi receives a complete report of this meeting. The Human Colonial Congress will consider your proposals." "When?" Kilnos asked desperately. "Director, every day we delay means millions more deaths. The void. Crawlers have reached the inner systems. The Cytherian Empire controls half the former council space. Entire species are being wiped out while we talk." "The Congress meets in regular session," Han Yu-jin replied calmly. "Your proposals will be added to the agenda." Back on Earth, President Choi Yun-bi read the full report in her private office. She was the granddaughter of the president who had overseen the Great Withdrawal, inheriting both his position and his principles. The weight of galactic suffering pressed down on her as she reviewed the casualty reports and refugee numbers. The debate in Congress was fierce. General Yoon, Hae-won, now elderly but still sharp, argued for limited intervention. "Madam President, we are talking about genocide on a scale never before seen. Entire civilizations are being erased from existence. How can we stand by and watch?" Dr. Lee Byung-soo, the xenobiologist who had witnessed the original council betrayal, disagreed. "General, I understand your compassion, but we cannot save species that refuse to save themselves. Every civilization that survives this crucible will be stronger for it. Those that do not," he shrugged sadly. "Perhaps they were never meant to inherit the galaxy." The president listened to hours of debate. Representatives spoke of moral duty, of human responsibility, of the innocent lives being lost. Others argued that humanity had learned its lesson about being the galaxy's protector. They had been rewarded for 3 centuries of service with demands for their own destruction. The question before us, President Choi said finally, is not whether we can help. We can. Our fleets are stronger than ever. Our technology has advanced beyond anything the galaxy has seen. We could end these conflicts in months. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the bustling cities of Earth. The question is whether we should. Whether helping them now would teach them anything, or whether it would simply reset the cycle. Whether they would be grateful for our intervention, or whether they would simply find new reasons to fear and resent us once the immediate crisis passed. The vote was close, 102 in favor of intervention, 98 against. But it was not close enough to override the president's veto. Humanity would remain in the Sol system. When Han Yu-jin delivered the news to the alien delegation, several of them collapsed. Kilnos began to weep, a sound like breaking glass that the universal translator could not properly convey. Zara Lynn's musical communication became a wail of despair that resonated through the station's metal walls. "Please," Kilnos begged, "we will give you anything. Our worlds, our technology, our children as hostages. Name your price." Han Yu-jin looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Ambassador, you still do not understand. This was never about price. This was about respect. For 300 years, you took our protection for granted. You used our strength to avoid developing your own. You demanded our blood, but not our friendship." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "When you are ready to talk to us as equals rather than as supplicants, when you come to us with offers of partnership rather than submission, then we can discuss the future. Until then, the Sol system remains closed." The alien delegation was provided with supplies, medical care, and transport to wherever they wished to go. But they received no military aid, no promise of intervention, no hope of salvation. They left Luna Station the same way they had arrived, as refugees from a galaxy that was learning the hard way what it meant to stand on its own. 5 years had passed since the last human ship left galactic space. Commander Yintel stood on the bridge of the Phoenix Coalition flagship, watching her mixed fleet move through the Vega Nebula. Her ship was built from salvaged parts and desperate innovation, held together by determination and the hard-learned lessons of survival. The Phoenix Coalition represented what remained of galactic civilization. Of the original 847 species that had once filled the council chambers, only 200 had survived as independent civilizations. The rest had been conquered, absorbed, or simply wiped out during the chaos years. But those who remained had learned something their ancestors never understood: how to fight for themselves. Yintel herself had once been a council diplomat, trained in negotiation and compromise. Now she wore battle armor and carried weapons, her soft hands scarred from years of desperate combat. The transformation had been painful, but necessary. The galaxy no longer had the luxury of pure diplomats. "Commander, we are receiving distress signals from the Kepler system," reported her tactical officer, a young Alterian who had learned warfare from studying old human military manuals. "Cytherian raiders are attacking the mining colonies." Response. "Time?" Yintel asked. 18 hours at maximum burn." She nodded. "Signal the fleet. We move to intercept." The battle that followed would have been impossible 5 years earlier. The Phoenix Coalition ships fought with a coordination and ferocity that would have impressed their old human protectors. They had learned from every defeat, adapted to every challenge, and grown stronger with each passing month. The Cytherian Empire, despite its early victories, had discovered that conquest was easier than rule. War Master Krexaval was dead, killed by Alterian resistance fighters who had studied human guerrilla tactics. His successors found themselves fighting on dozens of fronts as newly militarized species struck back at their occupiers. The Void Crawlers, the galaxy's ancient nightmare, had been contained by a network of early warning stations built with salvaged human technology. The surviving species had learned to cooperate in ways they never had under human protection, sharing resources and information because their very survival depended on it. Admiral Park So-jin, now in her 70s, stood in the command center of the Sol Defense Network. The array of monitors around her showed a galaxy transformed. Human intelligence gathering had never stopped, even during the isolation years. They watched, they recorded, they analyzed, but they did not interfere. "Admiral, we are receiving another diplomatic mission request," Lieutenant Kang Ye-jin reported. She was older now, too, a captain in her own right, but still served as Park's aide. "This one is different. They are not asking for military aid." Park So-jin raised an eyebrow. "What are they asking for?" "Trade negotiations, technology exchange, scientific cooperation. They want to discuss mutual defense treaties as equals." The Admiral studied the request details. The Phoenix Coalition was proposing a relationship based on partnership rather than protection. They offered their own innovations in exchange for human technology. They suggested joint research projects and shared patrol duties. Most importantly, they approached humanity not as supplicants, but as potential allies. "Schedule a meeting," Park So-jin decided, "but make it clear that any agreement must be approved by Congress and the President." President Choi Yoon-bi reviewed the Phoenix Coalition proposal in her private study. The document was remarkably different from the desperate pleas they had received years earlier. These aliens were not begging for salvation. They were offering partnership. The proposal included detailed intelligence reports about threats the coalition had identified and contained. They had developed new defensive technologies by combining salvaged human equipment with their own innovations. They had established trade networks and mutual defense pacts that covered most of the surviving civilizations. Most interesting of all, they had created a new form of government. The Phoenix Council operated on principles of earned representation. Species that contributed more to collective defense had more voice in military decisions. Worlds that provided resources or technology gained influence in economic policy. It was a merit-based system that would have been impossible under the old Council's one species, one vote structure. "They have grown up," President Choi observed to her chief of staff. "The question is whether they have grown up enough." The meeting took place on Ceres Station, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It was neutral ground, technically, within the Sol system, but far enough from Earth to avoid any appearance of submission by the alien delegation. Ambassador Ril Hun led the Phoenix Coalition team. He was one of the few surviving members of the original Galactic Council, a being who had witnessed both the height of the old system and its catastrophic collapse. Age had made him wiser, and survival had made him humble. "President Choi," he began formally, "we come not as petitioners, but as neighbors. The Phoenix Coalition does not seek your protection. We seek your partnership." The negotiations lasted for weeks. Both sides approached the discussions with careful professionalism. The humans had learned to be cautious about galactic entanglements. The aliens had learned the value of self-reliance. Neither side wanted to repeat the mistakes of the past. The final agreement was limited, but significant. Joint research stations would be established at the boundary between human and coalition space. Trade would resume on a carefully regulated basis. Information about external threats would be shared through automated networks. Most importantly, military cooperation would be purely voluntary, with no species obligated to defend another. Captain Nam Ji-woo, now an admiral commanding, the Border Patrol, watched the first coalition ships dock at the new research station. Her hair was gray and her face lined with years, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her famous. She had been present at humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. Now she was witnessing their cautious return. Admiral, the coalition delegation is requesting permission to tour our facilities, her aide reported. Granted, she replied, but make sure they understand the rules. This is cooperation, not submission. They are welcome as partners, not as dependents. President Choi Yoon-bi made her final entry in the official record of the Phoenix Accords. Her words would be studied by historians for generations to come. The galaxy begged for peace when what they really wanted was submission. They found war and learned strength. Now they return not as beggars, but as equals. Perhaps they are finally ready for true partnership. The stars looked the same as they always had, but the galaxy itself had changed. Humanity no longer carried the burden of galactic protection alone. The survivors of the chaos years had proven they could stand on their own. Together, they faced an uncertain future, but they faced it as partners rather than as master and servant. The long lesson was finally learned. Peace was not the absence of conflict. Peace was the presence of justice, built by those strong enough to defend it and wise enough to share the burden.